Welcome to Heavy Strategy. In today's sponsored show, we're talking AIOps and service assurance with Vitria. Now, one way to look at artificial intelligence in the telco infrastructure and any infrastructure space generally is to say that, first of all, we had manual operation, artisanal handcrafted configurations, and then we moved up to automation of elements. We started to use Python scripts and Ansible and various tools like that to automate a device. And then we moved on to saying what we need is to automate all things, a line of things. And so this sort of led to what I call orchestration. I am orchestrating multiple automations to build a service delivery, to build a service end to end. And the actions that we perform when we're doing this, though, were deterministic. That is, a human decides what action to take. And the logical question here is, does this leave room for improvement? And of course, in technology, the answer is yes. There's always room for improvement. I'm Greg Farrow, and you can be my internet friend on LinkedIn or over on Twitter if you like. Jonah Till-Johnson would love to connect with you on her company's website. She's joining me today. And our guest is Charlotte Patrick, and she is working with Vitria Technologies. She's an independent industry analyst covering the use of artificial intelligence in the telco space. Thanks very much for joining us, Charlotte. Let's get straight into the first question. Looking across at the telco industry, where is the majority of intelligence automation being added to the infrastructure today?
So when you look across a telco, basically you end up with sort of buckets of questions that need and problems that need to be answered and the resolutions to them. And so where you see most things happening today are in large, complex sets of data where you've got the ability to diagnose problems and predict and prescribe actions. You've then got a bunch of use cases which are really around automations.
Yeah.
So this is about, repetitive tasks and large teams and things that need putting in there. And then you have kind of a couple of sets of different questions. You either see personalization. Where does the telco need to do something personalized for its customers? And then you get kind of classic planning problems as well. There's sort of another version of AI automation. And then you've got a selection of sort of standalone AI opportunities.
So I think you're saying there's like three different parts there. There's an operational aspect. How do I operate my telco infrastructure more efficiently? I can use AIOps to automate regular tasks. But I think I heard you say you can also use AI to accelerate the planning tasks as well. Do I need new services? How do I is that right?
Yeah, so you typically they're either optimization tasks, basically. So how do I make something behave in its optimum fashion? Or it could be something like slightly more kind of design-led, like you're trying to plan a network and things. And that's, so you have several options. And again, you're looking to find the best one out of that. Yeah.
So, Charlotte, just connect the dots for some of our listeners here. It sounds, you talked a lot about optimization. How does this translate into bottom line value?
I keep a big spreadsheet, and on my spreadsheet, I look at, for an average telco, so we go something along the lines of a $16 billion telco. So that's not Verizon. It's more like a European telco, and it kind of averages
like a Colt
out.
Or someone like that, yeah.
Yeah. And I add up that there is an estimated $1.2 billion of value. That's on a revenue of $16 billion. And that is bottom line uplift. So I'm talking about CapEx and OpEx decreases or revenue increases. And that's if I start all of my projects kind of right now. And that's what I will see each year for, say, the next 5 years. So the value is roughly, and if I did my math correctly, roughly about 10% improvement. Could you kind of do one double click deeper and talk about where some of that improvement comes from? Yeah, absolutely. So obviously the majority of it is the network and what you might describe as kind of roughly the network management space. So automations in the network, reduces staff costs and optimizes expensive equipment, that type of thing. There's then a nice little bucket labeled assurance. So you've got more automations, ability to see up and down the stack and across domains. And I see good value there. And then you tend to go into places where either something like network planning, where you've got large CapEx and OpEx decreases potentially for undertaking, making something more optimized. And then also the big teams, so field services, order management, those type of things, and perhaps into the contact center as well. There's always some decent value.
So when you're talking about AIOps, you're not just talking about operating the network. You're actually talking about doing integrations with a whole range of tools that exist inside of a telco. Like you're reaching into the OSS and the BSS. You're reaching into the customer databases, and then you're looking at the networks to be able to bring it into a unified platform that uses artificial intelligence to tell you what's happening. So, if network performance is bad, which customers are being impacted type of thing.
Absolutely. So my spreadsheet says, so first of all, I break down the telco into different processes, and that could be any process. I'm going into HR or going into security all over the place and saying, so where could analytics or AI or automation have some value? What could it do? And then I'm trying to say, so what are the drivers of revenue there or CapEx, OpEx decreases? So this is a really, really broad piece of work that I've done.
Interesting. So I want to circle back on something, and hopefully it's not too soon in the conversation to ask, but I know you sort of you differentiate between assurance as something that's distinct from resilience, automation, intelligence, etc. And maybe you could just define for our listeners what you mean by assurance.
Oh, yes. So I take assurance into a sort of number of different categories, and typically a sort of FMPM, the old things that we've been doing for a long time on the resource side, things like traffic analysis. And then also I have the service assurance separately. So I'll have PM and FM there, along with kind of proactive fault management and kind of newer things. And then I've also got a kind of customer centric assurance, things like managing SLAs and tracking individual customers. And I have some little additional pieces there around making sure that enterprises or partners also have the ability to see assurance data as well. So it's quite a broad area.
Does assurance actually help raise an SLA to the level of an XLA, so the customer experience level?
Well, theoretically, with some closed loop and some more dynamic SLA management, yes, I think it's still work in progress, and it's allied to, how much the telcos are doing with their 5G services. Are they actually selling anything? Therefore, oh gosh, now we need some better sorts of SLAs. So it is work in progress, along with other things, in that area, like creating slices that are easier to assure and, that kind of thing. So it's in development.
So the sort of person that should be listening to this or would initiate this sounds to me it's going to be not so much engineering led, but much more business led, or am I misunderstanding?
Well, so I come from a business background, and my kind of view is that if you don't know where the financial value is, then you're going to struggle to really make decisions, because there is so much that can be done, and so many vendors, so much, talk in the market about where AI and automation is really going to work. So yeah, I do take it from quite a top level view, but actually then go down quite deep, because what I discover is that you can't talk about the value of assurance if you don't really know what's going to be done and what's feasible.
Yeah. I guess when we talk about tools like this, there's always two ways that you can approach it. One is a bottom up, where the engineering team starts deploying and focusing on short-term wins. And another way to do it is say this is a whole of company approach, and it starts from the top down. And you focus on things like automating billing or operations or design, something like that. Could you take something like the Vitria product suite and start from the bottom up or from the top down, or either or both?
I mean, I think just generally, everybody, obviously, you're going to knock out your quick wins first, and you just hope, well, if you haven't spent a lot of time calculating the value, you just hope that the things that your vendor promised you are going to become, reality on your bottom line. And then I think what people are finding, and I hope I'm answering the question, but I've just done a really interesting piece looking at assurance and talking to the vendors who are doing this, and they say, well, what happens is everybody has done a bunch of stuff, and then you have to, well, what do you do now? And the answer is you go to where you've got things, and you look upstream and downstream and say, what are the next things that you need to do? But then also, as you were saying, you have to overlay, if you want to get to a self-healing network, whatever that might mean,
Well, I guess I'm more thinking in terms of service assurance, right? So the goal here is always to reach for service assurance, and Vitria is very much focused on service assurance as what it delivers to customers. But the challenge there is that the service might run across 50 different technologies, 30 different business units, and, all the different areas. And quite often the best way to start this is to say, I'm going to define my service as this or some subset of functionality, and then start building out. And it's like an onion. You build from the center and you add the layers on, and you grow out. You use your integrations with your databases. You use your integrations with your net performance system. Maybe you're plugging into some digital experience management system and you want to feed that data into your AIOps and to say, I've got if there's a service problem on a network, I need my ops to know about it and the help desk should know. But then I need a tool to help desk say which customers are impacted. Those are the things that we don't have today, but we can actually bring them on piece by piece, I think. And that's where I think the value is for a lot of companies, because big things don't. Well, the lesson we know from working with companies like Oracle and SAP is big projects fail more often than they succeed.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I'd jump in on that as well and say what I heard you saying there, Charlotte, was it's great to have all this information, but unless you close that loop and do something with it and then continue the process and see whether what you did actually improve things, your information is useless. At some point, you have to put it into action, and that piece still requires human intervention.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, thinking about this, of course, thinking about the projects that are happening today and most prevalent, and whether and how exactly that fits into the total picture. I mean, I think the part of it is that on the problem resolution side. So there's sort of automated root cause analysis, the first place that you go to with some AI, and that's been going on for the last 3 or 4 years, I suppose. And then, of course, it's complicated by the introduction of new domains and 5G SA and so forth, when you have to change the way completely that you assure things and the data comes from a different place. So you've got both a rolling introduction of more AI, more automation, plus all the changes that are going on underneath.
Open RAN. People are moving Open RAN into 5G SA and then trying to go to 5G. There's so much happening in that, and at the building block level, the APIs and everything that's defined in these is very grey at this point. So when you're building a whole of business system or an end-to-end service assurance process, it is very daunting, and potentially until you're using artificial intelligence, it may not even be practical. Let me ask a weird question. I want to ask a bit of an odd question. So one of the things that we have is, what do customers object to? Like if we go out and talk to them about AIOps, and I'm sure you're talking to lots of telcos about this, do they ever come back to you and say, no, or that's silly, or that's a crazy idea? Do you get objections and pushback around AIOps? And if so, what are they?
I think it has come on leaps and bounds. Usually there is, we've got to build it first before we assure it. And so you're waiting for stuff to happen on the deployment side in order to do that. And then there are a series of topics which go up and down in interest. So, for example, NWDAF and some of the newer capabilities and theories about how best to capture assurance data and use it, they seem to go up and down. And it depends on I don't know. It slightly depends on how it depends on what they need immediately, and if something like NWDAF is tied to services and services aren't, quite as hot as just getting something that will look across domains so that we can see what the major problems are, then they do go up and down. So I would say not a no, but certainly variable enthusiasms.
I was thinking this is, adding AIOps could potentially be a big, and there's a certain weariness, I think, in the telco industry at the moment about doing more. Like we've had that major 5G push, the push to move to 5G. And if you're in the fixed line space, you've moved up to DWDM, you're clocking up from, 100 gig to 400 gig to 800 gig. You're moving away from DWDM with IP edge to integrated IP. There's so much happening in the telco space that adding this on top of could be seen as something that's a step too far.
Well, and that's why I was kind of jumping in and asking the questions about how to extract the value that you talked about, Charlotte. You actually need humans to make changes to their processes, to think more broadly, and basically take something that they probably had gotten to the point where it was pretty effective as a process and pretty error-free, because telcos are usually extremely risk-averse and they don't want to introduce anything that might add errors and mistakes, and saying, oh gosh, now you have to go change your process because you have all this insight and information that you didn't previously have. And I can see that being a bit of a barrier. I think, Greg, you talked about the weariness, but I think there's also the legit fear of risk, because doing something differently always adds the risk that you might crash the system inadvertently.
I'd probably come back on that and say, actually, of all the areas that I've been tracking, actually, assurance has suddenly got a massive boost because the data that is collected is useful in so many of the closed loops. There is no way we're doing an intent-based network or automation of planning or some of the orchestrations without a really good knowledge of, when something happened, how that performed and whether that was the right thing to do. So there's a sudden renaissance of interest actually in assurance and a sort of, how can we get hold of the data? How can it be in a standard format, et cetera, et cetera.
You said sudden twice. Is there any precipitating factor in your view that kind of drives this interest?
I think for me, two things. Number one, people started to talk about end-to-end service orchestration. And I know it's been going on for a bit, but it feels to me like it's just sort of ramping up a little now because some of the first bits are done and there's more happening, more end-to-end stuff. And then also intent-based networks. I mean, we are some distance from them, but I was speaking with TM Forum yesterday about where they are. And, there are some intent-based bits and pieces out there, and that all needs assurance data at some point to make it work.
Yeah, so it sounds like this is an idea whose time has come, largely because people have been teased with some of the new capabilities that they might get, and now suddenly they've got the data that allows them to actually take advantage of these tools.
I guess one area that I'm thinking of is that telcos often talk about a skills shortage. We've had a real problem where they're looking for a certain type of person or a certain type of capability. Do you think AIOps, from a business point of view, is going to reduce the need for specialist skills or reduce the need for experts? And maybe, or does it, are these systems expert systems or expert replacement systems in that sense?
Yes, where assurance can allow either simple or complex things to be fixed without too much intervention. That's going to take down knock and sock staff. And then I guess also as that data helps with, getting the trouble tickets and the network service desk kind of able to do what they need to do quicker and things. Yes, there is a place there for cost savings and on headcount. Yeah.
Yeah. I think for me, what I see with, using tools like Vitria AIOps to do the service assurance is that a lot of your first line simplifies. So where your first line would often have to do a data gathering to find out what's, the customer rings in and says, my service is broken. Well, what is the customer service and how many elements are in that path? And what is it about those, where are the parts of, there's so much of that. That's to be able to comprehend the end-to-end system is actually quite a difficult thing to comprehend. But if you have a system like, an AIOps that's doing service assurance, it can pop up and say, here's all the elements in this customer service that you could be looking at, and potentially even go further. It can start to attach into the network performance monitoring platform or the streaming data, the telemetry that's coming off those systems, or look at application performance data that sometimes, if you've got all of this enabled in your AIOps. Is that the sort of... Do you agree with that perspective?
Absolutely. I mean, speaking with Vitria and it's, some of the stuff is not really that. It sounds easy. It sounds easy to see things across domain, and it sounds easy to do the root cause analysis, but it isn't. And anything that AIOps can do is a massive benefit, to solving problems.
Yeah, you still end up with your level 3 engineers. You probably don't reduce those, but you do reduce, that down at the lower levels. And probably more importantly, I think AIOps might hopefully lead to a better customer service. Like, if there's a problem, you get to fixing it faster, or potentially even before they know there's a problem.
Yeah, it occurs to me, okay, so we're supposed to have this dark knock and things, but if from a financial point of view, you look at it, whether it's worth, your level 3, don't know how many you have, 10, 20 of them, they're not a massive expense compared to some of the other things that you could be doing. So potentially, it's still okay to have some things that acquire a human ongoing, and it probably makes sense to do so.
So I want to kind of pivot a little bit. We've talked a lot about the benefits that these tools can bring. What kinds of questions should telcos be asking themselves? Somebody who's listening to this going, oh my gosh, you're absolutely right. I really need to be deploying these tools. What are some of the questions they should be asking themselves when looking to create value from automation and intelligence in the area of assurance?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing would be still is observability. Do I have what I need going forward? Can I see the customers either individually or in groups? And do I have it across old and new domains? Are there any holes that occur? So the newer assurance systems usually have all the cloud and edge capabilities in there, or you can, or you can purchase them. But some of the older solutions probably aren't in there. So that is, it's important to consider observability. I would then also talk about maximizing efficiency savings, probably. How can assurance really help to create a good customer experience on a budget? And that is a much broader question, obviously, but a really important one, because there is always this push between saving money and getting new revenues. And at the moment, as far as I can see, there's a lot of concentration on new revenues and how to generate those and how to support those. But at the moment, I do think there's still room to be had in efficiencies and savings, and that should be something else that people are looking at.
Let's look a little bit into the future, because the AIOps industry is an evolving, changing thing. AI is, in practical terms, AI is less than a year old in some ways. If you look at it in the consumer market, obviously AI has been around for longer in the telco market. Where do you think is the new things that are going to come? Let's look it forward. If you're Vitria and you're customers are looking to deploy Vitria in their infrastructure, what are the new things that are going to be going down the pipeline?
I feel the urge never to mention Gen AI, because it is it's so overspoken at the moment. But I do see a few use cases for it that look good. Digital assistant type capabilities, the ability to do knowledge management type things inside of some of the inventories and the catalogs. That's good. Question mark about whether it's really the right tool to be doing anomaly detection and other kind of classic AI or ML problems that you see in networks. I have questions about that. And then I'm very excited about generative multi-agent systems at the moment and how those could be generative. But that's, I'm way off in the future there. So coming back to, where can it be used today? I think there's still a lot of places to go around the root cause analysis, actually. I think it is sometimes used, but there are other things that could be done. It is also, there is need to start to use machine learning where you've got a lot of data, like, for example, when you're bringing into assurance, you're starting to bring in cloud resources and VNFs for PM and FM. I think there's stuff to be done there. And then, of course, if we're talking RAN assurance, the RAN is a whole extra layer of complexity sometimes, and there is some interesting uses for machine learning assurance there.
Yeah, this is where I get into my question. Like, you can put AI on top of the RAN and get a lot of value, especially about spectrum management and fault detection. And, in the case of interference, you can really start to, change the way you understand what's happening pop by pop at the edge of the network. But I think the challenge is that the RAN has to be combined with what's happening in the backbone and then what's happening across the core. And also, how do you monitor all of that to say, your customers are connected at the 5G POP, but there's a fixed line at the other end, it's the last mile fixed line that's got a problem, for example, or how do I optimize my 5G POPs and my spectrum allocation across those POPs so that I can spend less, especially at the moment they're talking about renting spectrum allocation between telcos and things like that. I think AI and automation could be really valuable there.
Yeah, absolutely. Super difficult problems. And where especially, there's a whole range of things one could go into. But so first of all, it's just, single pane of glass and just dragging all of those things in. But then you start to get conflict management needed as well, and things, especially when you start to talk about, assurance and SLA management on, of services and so forth. So there is a range of things, and that's where the AIOps platform begins to come into its own. Is when you've got you've got you need a single pane of glass, because how are you going to do it otherwise?
Yeah, well, I think the challenge here is, for me, AIOps is about starting somewhere and learning. I don't think you want to go with the big bang approach and say we're AIOpsing the whole telco. You have to find a place, and I think it's much more of an evolutionary approach. And the way I look at Vitria is they have all of these integrations. You don't have to do them all at once. You can start and build them up over time. And I think that's a much more realistic way of doing things. There's been so much change. Putting this on top of the workload might be a bit of a problem. But I think probably the place to start is in assurance. Are my services working? How do I look at the data that I've already got out there and say my DWDM is working, my RANs are working, my POPs are working?
Yeah, I would take that all the way back to what Charlotte said earlier, which is start with observability. What can you see? How can you put these end-to-end pieces together so you can see what's going on? And then the next question you can ask yourself is, what can I do about this? Where can I optimize? What are my opportunities for improvement?
Yeah, and particularly with an eye to services, it seems to be, to some extent, the network observability is becoming something that, networks are becoming more reliable because there are other automations that are doing things. So although there's still a horrid amount of stuff that needs to be done, I think the move is definitely towards services and how is the user experiencing things.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time that we've got for today. Thanks very much to Vitria for sponsoring today's show and taking the time to join us and to talk about AIOps. It's not often we get to talk about AIOps in a telco environment, so it's interesting to think of things from a big perspective. Thanks very much for joining us today, Charlotte. It's been a pleasure to have you on and to share your views across what we've going. If people want to find out more about you, they can go to the show notes, which go along with the show over at packetpushers.net. Just go down to the Heavy Strategy podcast and have a look there. There's lots more information on the Vitria website. That's Vitria, that's Vitria, just as it sounds. You can then check throughout a whole bunch of things. You can find them on Twitter and on LinkedIn, of course, if you want to find out more information. If you've heard something on the show that's interesting you, don't forget to tell them where you heard it from. Head along to Vitria, Vitria.com to find out more about them. Particularly go and have a look at their service assurance. They've got a bunch of resources. I was actually preparing for the show by checking out their website where they've got some white papers and some videos and some various pieces of information that help you look at service assurance transformation. So go and check that out. As always, thanks very much for listening to today's show. Thanks very much to Jonah. Thanks very much to Charlotte. Thanks very much to Vitria. Find us on our website at packetpushers.net. So thanks very much for listening to Heavy Strategy, where the questions are more important than the answers. And we'll look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks.